Hi, it's Gary. Welcome to today's video. Well, today it's the final heat in my top 5 pens from 2021. Today we're going to be looking at pens over 200 Australian dollars. And then next week it's the grand final. So join me now down on the mat and let's look at my top 5 pens over 200 Australian dollars. So here we are down on the mat. First pen we're going to look at today is this, the Twsbi Draco. I love the colouring on this pen. It looks really nice. It's different, isn't it? You've got reds in there, you've got some pinks, you've got blacks, crimson, got a bit of white coming through occasionally. And that's paired up with all this gorgeous rose gold trim. It really looks nice. Let's take off the cap. This to me is one of the things that lets this pen down. It's this nib. It looks really tiny compared to the rest of the pen. It's a number 5 size nib, but saying that, it's rose gold coloured. I mean, it is a steel nib. It's a standard Twsbi nib other than that. So there you can see we've got a decorative border at the top, Twsbi logo, the word Twsbi, and then B for broad. This is a broad nibbed pen. In my hand, it's a nice fit. It's nice. It's not overly short, but it's not overly long. This is, to me, just about the right size for a pen in my hand. I can post the pen, and it does post securely. My concern with that, let me just take it off, it looks like it posts onto here. This is the filling mechanism, because this is a piston pen, and I just worry when I'm trying to take that cap off, because it is really nice and secure, that I'm going to end up twisting this mechanism and ejecting ink from the nib. One of the things I like about this pen is down here. So as I said, piston pen, and we've got here an ink window so we can see the ink that's left in the pen. Again, I'm just being very nitpicky here. It's a little bit on the small side. I'd like to have seen that a bit wider because I do struggle sometimes to actually see what the ink level is, especially when there's not a lot of ink left. But it does what it's there for. It still lets me see it. Let's do some writing. So we have here a Twsbi Draco. As said, broad nib. Cost me 215 Australian dollars. The ink is by Diamine and it's Syrah. I've got a number of inks, very similar colours to this Draco. So here we've got Syrah, I've got Merlot, I've got Writer's Blood. I've even used Red Dragon in here. And they all look really nice and all seem to match this pen really well. I'm going to move the mic so you can hear the pen writing. So I just realised that I had the paper up a bit too high, so you couldn't actually see the top line, and that's why I've moved the paper. Hopefully I've fixed that for you now. This is a really nice pen, really nice coloured ink. One of my concerns, I think it's a little bit overpriced. I think $215 is an awful lot for what you actually get. If this had been about $150, I think it would have been spot on. But that's just my personal point of view. I think if it had had a number 6 nib, so a slightly bigger nib with a little bit more springiness to it, again, it may have been worth the $215. I mean, I'm glad I've got it, and if I had to, I would buy it again. It's just, as I say, I'm just not 100% certain. I think this is overpriced. Let's go and look at the Tomoe River paper. So this is a Galen leather notebook. This uses Tomoe River 52 GSM paper. So we can see here, I mean, I'm calling that right at the top. I'm in two minds about it. For writing, it's gorgeous. It's really nice and wet. It flows really well. I have had no problems writing. I just think it might be overpriced. The ink I've got in here, I haven't used it for a while. The last pen I used it in was the D-Lake New Moon 2. So it's one I'm glad to get the ink out, and I think it's a really good match for this pen. When I'm writing, especially over on the optic paper, which we'll come back to in a second, I see quite a bit of shading coming through, so there's a lot of character there. The nib is nice and smooth. It's got that little bit of pencil-like feedback that I like, so it's not glassy smooth. Looking at the bottom, so this is a standard test I do for all my pens on this paper. The first hash mark, that's just me writing it. The second one, I write the hash mark, then immediately smudge it. I then do a little bit of a scribble, and again a scribble and smudge, just so I can see the wetness. Underneath that, I'm looking for line variation. So the first 3 lines, they're with no pressure. The second 3 lines, they've got pressure added. And then I do some figure of 8s. So again on here, we see there's a little bit of line variation, but not much. Right at the bottom, that's one continuous writing, and I'm just going and looping and looping and looping. And again, that's for me to test the ink flow. Does the ink keep up as I'm writing? So back with the optic paper, this is a black and red notebook, so it's using the Oxford optic paper. I love this paper for my writing. This is where I was saying, you can see that there's some character coming through. You can see a bit of shading in this writing. There's no shimmer or anything like that, no sheen. Just try and catch that. But I do enjoy using it. So this is the Twsbi Draco and Diamine Syrah. Pen number 2 is this. This is a tiny pen. This is a Sailor ProGear Slim. This is a Sailor ProGear Slim, and the colouring is blue-green Nebula. I love the colouring of this pen. So you can see where it's blue-green, it's like that tealy colour. But to my eye, and I'm not sure if it comes over on the camera, I then see white or silvery specks embedded in the material, which reminds me of stars. Now I have tried wiping this with a cloth, so I know it's not dust, so I think it's embedded there in the material. I think it looks really pretty. I like the demonstrator nature of this, so we can see through to the cartridge converter. So it comes with this cartridge converter. There we go. One of my, I'm not going to say disappointments, but one of the things I would have loved to have seen is to have plastic or resin instead of metal fittings. We've got an O-ring at the bottom. We've got plenty of threads. This would have been perfect as an eyedropper pen, but because of their metal fittings, unfortunately, I can't do that. The nib, again, it's a small nib. It's a small pen though, and this is a 14 karat gold nib. So on here we've got that typical Sailor nib. So we've got the scroll work around the side, 1911, the anchor, and then we've got 14K and 585, and right at the very bottom we've got Sailor. On the left hand side we've got H-B. This is a broad nib. I think this is a gorgeous looking pen. I really do. It's so nice to use. If you post it, look at that, unposted. I can maybe get away with a couple of lines, but I certainly couldn't use that long term like that. Posted, it's perfect. It feels so nice. The cap doesn't add anything much in the way of weight or balance, but it just makes the pen fit so nicely in my hand. Let's do some writing. So we've got here. So this issue I've just had at the top, I think that's because I've had the cap on and off whilst I've been showing it to you. So this is the Sailor ProGear Slim. The nib, as I said, is a broad nib, and this cost me 224 Australian dollars. Now, although it's a broad, when you compare it with the writing from the Draco, doesn't that look so much thinner, that line? That's because this is a Japanese broad, whereas the Draco, that's more of a European broad. The ink is by Oster, and it's called Tranquility. Now, up to me putting this ink in here, I've only used Diamine Aurora Borealis in this pen, which to be honest is virtually the same colour as this Oster ink. Why I used the Aurora Borealis ink? Well, Aurora Borealis, that's an astronomical thing. Blue-green nebula, that's astronomical. So I was actually matching not so much on the colour but the name. And I think I'm going to alternate the fills of this pen between the Aurora Borealis and this Tranquility. I'll move the mic so you can hear the pen writing. Now, although this pen has got a gold nib, it feels very stiff. There's a definite pencil-like feedback to it. Now, I'm saying that as if it's a bad thing. It's not. I love it. I love writing with this pen. It's one of the ones that if it was there on my desk, I would reach for it without even thinking about it. You know, I would even choose it over some of the other pens in this selection. It's really nice to write with. I love the feedback. To me, that is really what makes the whole experience. Let's take a look over on the Galen leather paper. Again, I'm calling out here, it's a short pen. I'm calling out about using Diamine Aurora Borealis. There's nothing on here really that I haven't said already. If we look at the bottom, it's not as wet as the Draco. I didn't expect that because I think with it being that slightly thinner line, it's not going to put down as much ink. Because the nib's stiffer, I don't see as much in the way of line variation. You know, I'm still doing it there, and there's a little tiny, but nowhere near as much as I see on most of the other pens. Then the flow at the bottom, again, keeps it really well, you know, and I'm really scribbling fast when I'm doing that. Back on this optic paper, again, you can see here, it looks so nice. There's some shading coming through. There's character in the whole writing experience. I really enjoy it. So this is the Sailor ProGear Slim. Just going to slightly move the page up. Pen number 3 today. Well, we're going from Twsbi, which is Thailand. We've got Sailor ProGear Slim. That was from Japan. Well, we'll jump over to Germany. We'll take a look at the Diplomat Aero. This is in the factory finish. I will be honest, I absolutely love this. I prefer this to all the coloured Aeros that I've seen. It's just the plain aluminium, and I'm guessing they put a lacquer over it. We've got this, I would say, gunmetal grey type of clip, you know, very springy. Don't know if this is an issue. It doesn't seem to actually go all the way down to the body or to the cap. I very rarely put it in my shirt pocket, so I don't really care too much about that. I love the shape of this. It's unusual. I don't know, maybe it's like a Zeppelin type shape. I'm not sure really how to describe it. And then the way it's got these indentations, I think it looks so nice. To me, this is one of the downsides of this pen. The cap pulls off. I would have far preferred it to screw off, but it is what it is. Before we look at the nib, there we are. I'll undo the body. There we go. We've got a cartridge converter. Now that feels like it's again metal. So we've got metal and metal for the screws. Goes on nice and firm. The nib, number 6 size. Let's take a closer look at it. So at the top, around the border, we've got a little tiny line. Underneath that is the Diplomat logo. And we have Diplomat since 1822. And then B for broad. Nice, simple, plain nib. Let's do some writing. So we have here a Diplomat. Aero. Again, it's a broad nib. And this costs 263 Australian dollars. The ink is by Diamine. And it's marine. I quite like this ink. I like the colour of it. To me, it's like a bright blue, but with the slightest hint of green. So it's like looking in the ocean where it looks more or less blue, but you can see the green coming through. We can already see in here there's a fair bit of shading as well. That's something I like with my pens when there's shading, because to me, it adds interest to your writing. Before I do my final sentence, let's take a look at this in my hand. It's perfect in one respect, in that it sits quite nicely. Might have been better if it was the tiniest, maybe half a centimetre longer, but not really too much of an issue. At the bottom of the section there's a little tiny lip which does slightly dig into my hand, but not enough that it really causes any issues. I'm going to move the mic now so that you can hear the pen writing. This is such a gorgeous nib to write with. There's smoothness there. It's not quite gliding on the paper. There's a tiniest amount of feedback, so it feels like you're writing with a really fine, well-sharpened pencil. I really enjoy it. I like the fact that it's a broad nib. It lays down a lovely amount of ink, and as we can see from here, you can really see the character and the colour coming out in this ink. Let's jump on over to my Tomoe River paper. So here again, as I've already said, I've talked about gliding over the paper with that hardly noticeable feedback. Ink colour, I love it. That blue with a hint of green, I think it looks so nice. It's an ink you could use in a business setting and not worry too much about it, because if anybody says anything, well, it's blue. Maybe tending turquoise, but it's still blue. I've used a number of inks in this. So far, I've not had an issue with this ink, but with some of the others, I have noticed I get very infrequent skips. By infrequent, what I mean is maybe once or twice per fill of the pen. So it's not a daily occurrence, but I wanted to call it out because I have noticed it. At the bottom, we can see the wetness. So it's in the middle there in terms of wetness. Little tiny bit of line variation, not an over amount. And then in my scribble at the bottom, you can see how well it keeps up. I really enjoy this. I think it looks really nice. I say on this optic paper, I'm seeing, look at the eye where it's going almost black. I think it looks really nice. But this is the Diplomat Aero with Diamine Marine. So my fourth pen for today. This was my first gold nibbed pen, and this is the Pilot Custom Heritage 92. I absolutely love the colour of this. So it's like a very translucent black. So from a distance, all you see is black, but when you get up close, you can see through to the mechanism and the ink. One of the downsides of this pen to me, it's a piston filler, that's not the problem, but look at how much of the actual body is taken up by that piston mechanism. I would say we're talking 2/3 of the body is piston, which only leaves 1/3 for the ink. So in that respect, it's slightly disappointing because you can't get a massive amount of ink in here, but conversely, it means I can change the ink quite frequently. Let's take off the cap and take a look at the nib. So this is a small nib, a bit like that Staler ProGear Slim in terms of size, and it's a 14 karat gold nib, but it's rhodium plated. Let's take a closer look. So on this nib, we've got a gorgeous decorative scroll going around the outside. Coming down, we've got Pilot, then 14K585. Below that is number 5, which is the Pilot nib size. Then we've got M for medium. Down on the bottom, we've got 517, which that translates to the month that the pen was made in, and we've got a little logo on the other side. So quite a nice looking nib on this. In the hand, the pen feels nice. A little bit on the short side for me. Not enough that it would stop me from using it unposted, but it is a little bit short. It will post. It posts really securely, and it posts onto the body, and it's nice and usable posted and unposted. So let's do a little bit of writing. So we have here a Pilot Custom Heritage 92 with a medium nib, and this cost me 270 Australian dollars. The ink by Diamine, and it's Winter Spice. This to me, it's a gorgeous brown ink, but as it dries, there's a lot of green characteristics come out in it, so it's a bit like a green sheen. There's also a blue shimmer in there. I don't often see that coming out in my writing, which is a shame because when it does, it looks really nice. I'm actually sat here agitating the pen, so hopefully when I'm doing my writing, we may see a bit of that shimmer come through, but I don't know. As I say, I very rarely see that. You can see here already the brown, as it's dry, it's getting a bit of that green characteristic to it. So let's move the mic down to the paper. So writing, it's nice, it's got a lovely bit of feedback, it's got a bounciness to the nib. So between this and the Sailor, I like the feedback I get from the Sailor, but I love the bounciness that I'm feeling when I'm writing with the Pilot. You may have noticed I had a few issues with my writing. That's something I find I get consistently with this pen. I think it's more due to the way I have the nib rotated as opposed to an actual issue with the pen. It's easy enough to go back over the letter. It's normally just a line, and it's generally when it's a downstroke that I have the issue. Let me just see if I can do this in the light, see if we can see anything. So I can see a little bit of sheen coming through there. Certainly on the G of Grumpy and the R, I can definitely see that shimmering up quite nicely, but not a lot, which is a shame because I think where it does come through, it really adds to the character of the writing. Let's take a jump over to the Tomoe River paper. So here, I'm calling out, I enjoy using this pen. It's been constantly inked up since I got it. I've had loads of different inks and colours in here. The beauty with the colour of this pen, I could use any colour ink I want. Calling out about the lovely brown nature of the ink. It's a fairly dark ink. So again, it's one you could actually use in a business setting because I reckon people would think it's just like a dark grey or a black. One of my issues with this ink, because it's a shimmer ink, I was a bit nervous about using it in a piston filling pen. I'll just have to make sure when I clean it that I really give it a really good clean, and then be aware that some of that shimmer may come through in any subsequent inks. I'm willing to take that risk. It's a piston filler. Piston mechanism though just takes up so much room. Looking at wetness, it's a fairly wet combo. Look at that first smudge. That really goes quite a distance over the page. With it being this gold nib and with it having this bounce, there's a lot of line variation. Just look at the figure of 8s. I think they look so nice. And again, when I'm doing my scribble, no problem with ink flow. The only issue, as I said, is the occasional thing on a downstroke when I'm writing, which we saw over here back on the optic paper. But I think that was more a case of how I hold the pen as opposed to the pen itself. So this is the Pilot Custom Heritage 92. Let me just reposition the page just so we can get the bottom of it on. So the final pen, the last but not the least of today's pens, is this. This is by Leonardo, and it's the Leonardo Momento Zero Grande. And this is the dark Hawaii pattern. Just let's slowly spin this around. I love this spaghetti pattern. We've got dark blues, we've got some silvers there, we've got pale blues. Then we've got a hint of brown, so it's like the ocean coming up against the sand. I think this looks so nice, and with the silver coloured trim, that really enhances the whole thing. This is a big pen. I'm going to fetch back in that Pilot Custom Heritage. It's definitely a bigger pen. This is the Grande version. There is a standard version, which is a little bit shorter. It's a piston filler, so we've got a piston knob here. Let's take off the cap and look at this. This is a Leonardo nib. Quite a nice nib, this, isn't it? Very, very simple in its engraving. So we have a Leonardo logo. We've got the word Leonardo, and then right at the very bottom, we've got Italy. The size of the nib, that's round on the right hand side, so there we've got B for broad. It's a really nice nib, writes really well. It's a really nice nib and it writes really well. In my hand, let me just fetch in this card so I don't smudge the rest of the writing. This to me is the perfect size. It's got a bit of width to the body, so there's a nice girth. but it does taper down slightly towards the bottom, and that's where I tend to hold my pens anyway, so my fingers fit lovely in there. It's got the nice length to it. It's a pen. You can post it. I've got to be honest, I never do. Let's do some writing. So here we have a Leonardo. Just going to put MZG. MZG. From Momento 0 Grande. Medium nib. And there's two prices I'm going to give you for this. 377 and 470. 377, that's actually what I paid, and I bought it from Appelboom in the Netherlands. 470, that's how much I would pay to buy it in Australia. So you can understand why I would go to Appelboom. The ink is by Pure Pens. That's a Welsh company. And it's Celtic C. Now, before I finish off the writing sample, you notice on Leonardo and MZG I was having issues with it. It was looking as if there was no ink coming through. That's because there wasn't. This pen was empty. The rest of it I actually just dipped to the nib. This is highlighting an issue with this pen for me. There's no way to know how much ink you've got in the pen, which means you never know when you're recording a video and the pen doesn't write, which, I'll tell you something, makes me say some very rude words which I then edit out. That is the biggest drawback to this pen. If it had the ink window, it would be virtually perfect. Just going to dip the pen again, just for this one last writing sample. So, I love writing with this pen. As you can see, it's got a gorgeous line to it. Given where I am now, that line is a bit too thin. I still enjoy using it. It's still a pen that's always inked up. Normally I have blue inks in here, but I have used a couple of different brown inks as well. The ink in here, it does last a long time. I'm not going to lie and say, you only get a couple of sessions out of it. I don't. I normally get a couple of months out of it. But as we saw here, the downside, I just don't know when I'm going to run out of ink. And whilst I'm doing this, yes, I can very quickly dip my nib into the bottle of ink, but if I was out at a meeting, that would be quite embarrassing, especially if it's the only pen I took with me. So one of the things I always have to do is take at least one other pen with me when I'm going to be using this as my main pen. Let's jump over to the Tomoe River paper. I'm calling out here. I love it. I love the feedback. It's a pleasure to write with. It's not catching on the paper. It feels like you're writing with a sharp pencil. This ink, it doesn't shade as much as I was expecting. Now, I've tried this ink in some other pens and I do get a lot more shading. So it's just something to do with this combo. So I'm not sure if I'll be using this ink in this pen again. I love the size of this pen. My preference is for them slightly longer pens because I find the smaller pens, they're quite, I'm going to say, clumsy in my hand. Really like it. I know the pen cost a lot of money. It was worth every cent. I love using this pen so much. And this is a pen that if I had to go to a meeting, this is my pen of choice to take with me. If we look at the wetness, again, it's not overly wet, it's nice. Line variation, I don't see too much. The nib is quite stiff, but again, I enjoy that because I enjoy quite often the stiffer nibs. Yes, I know when I was talking about the bounce in the Heritage, but for most day-to-day writing, this is really nice. Ink flow keeps up, apart from when you're recording a video and the pen decides to run out of ink. So this pen, this is the Leonardo Momento 0 Grande. Just going to slightly move this paper so we can see a little bit of each of the writing samples. There you are, I moved it too far, and now we're perfect. So, the pens, we've got the Twsbi Draco, the Sailor ProGear Slim, the Diplomat Aero. You can see here there's a lot more green coming through in this writing, where we've got the Pilot Custom Heritage 92. Then finally, we've got the Leonardo Momento Zero Grande. So which of these pens are my winner? As I say, I love the Leonardo. I love taking that to meetings. I love the bounce when I'm writing with this Custom Heritage 92. I just don't like the fact that so much of the barrel is taken up by mechanism. I love the feel. I love the writing experience I get with the Diplomat Aero. I love the colour. Again, I actually quite like the writing experience that I get with the Sailor ProGear Slim. And then the Twsbi, I think that's a really nice fit in the hand. Again, writes nice, get occasional issues when I'm writing, but not enough that it would cause me a problem. So which pen's the winner? Well, for this one, in the over $200 category, the winner is the Diplomat Aero. I just think it's the all-round best pen out of the lot of them, even though I enjoy all of the pens. So this Diplomat Aero, that's going to move forward to the grand final where it will compete against pens from all the other categories. So what do you think of my top 5? Are there any pens that you would include which I haven't? Please drop a comment down below. Let's kickstart the conversation. Hit that thumbs up button every time you like, every time you comment. Well, it just helps with the YouTube algorithm to surface my content for other people. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so that you can get new videos as I release them. I'll talk to you again soon.